Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 41 of my 2020 reads. This week I actually read quite a few good books. So first, I finished my reread of Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I had read this right when it first came out, but then I started rereading it out loud to my husband, Sush, and we finally finished that reread, and it was so good. It was such a fun thing to read, especially as we're kind of entering the spooky season. It's very atmospheric and just really worked. So we had such a fun time rereading it. I am going to be doing a standalone review for this, so that should be up later this week. But in the meantime, there are some really good Own Voices Mexican reviews of this book. I will link below Andrea at bookramble and Cynthia at BookWhimsy. Both have great reviews of this book. So if you have not read this yet, I really strongly recommend it. It is Silvia Moreno-Garcia's take on a Gothic novel, which basically sets this Gothic novel in the 1950s in Mexico and focuses on a lot of really interesting ideas, especially that of eugenics and gaslighting, and it has such a creepy atmosphere and is just such a good read. Oh, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, same as the last time I read it. Next, I read The Beatrix Gates by Rachel Pollack, which is a collection that I'd heard about from Rachel at Kalanadi, who I will link below. And this ended up being a really good short little collection of a couple of kind of SFF works, as well as a couple of essays and an interview. Rachel Pollack is somebody who was writing SFF in the 70s, 80s, and very influential in kind of representing trans characters. Rachel Pollack is trans herself, and it was just so fascinating to read some of these stories. The title story, The Beatrix Gates, is something that really is about the trans experience, but there were other things in here as well that were very interesting. There was one which was sort of a retelling of Joseph and the multicolored coat, the kind of story from the Torah, from the Old Testament, and it was just really interesting, all of the ways that these fantastical stories were written. And I loved the interview and the essay in particular that Pollack wrote, talking about the difference between what it was like being trans in the 70s and what it's like being trans now, and sort of how the language has changed and how important it was to talk about being trans and to see trans characters. So I thought it was a really good collection. Some of the things were not like 100% for me, but it was really good. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert, which is a book that is actually on my October TBR, go me, and something that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing, who I will link below. This is a paranormal romance novella about a werewolf huntress and a werewolf who fall in love, and it takes place over Halloween. So if you're looking for some sort of quick little atmospheric Halloween romance to read, this is great. It has Talia Hibbert's humor as always. The world building is really fascinating, and it was just a ton of fun. I definitely love the way that Talia Hibbert writes cinnamon roll lead males. The guy in this, even though he's a werewolf, is such a sweetheart, and he's like an artist, and he like carves acorns out of wood and all sorts of things. It's just very sweet and really a good pick-me-up. As is common, there's kind of that third act breakup, which was a little out of the blue for me in this one. I don't know if it was just because it was a novella and a little shorter or what, but that part kind of threw me off a bit. Other than that though, it was just a lot of fun to read. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating by Elisabeth Tova Bailey, which was yet another book that was actually on my October TBR. This is a book that I had heard about originally from Olive at abookolive, who I will link below. And then also in my TBR for October, I had a couple of people comment and say how much they loved this. So Leah had said that, as well as Andrea at Infinite Text, who I will also link below. So I was like, you know what, let me pick this one up. And it was really enjoyable. It was such a slow and beautiful book that was very much focused on nature writing. So much of this book is about the snail. Let me back up and say this book is about a woman who ends up becoming very, very ill and has to spend years in bed, basically unable to move. And at one point, a friend of hers brings a potted plant and a snail, and she ends up kind of forming a very strong attachment to this snail and later researching a ton about snails. So this story is very much a little bit of a reflection on her time being ill, as well as a lot about snails. So if you're looking for snail facts, this is the book for you. It also has a lot of things that she's pulled in, kind of poetry about snails and just ancient writings about snails, as well as, you know, scientific writings on snails. So it got me very in the mood to read nature writing. I loved that part of it. I think that the part about her illness was also interesting, although it didn't speak to me quite as much as I thought it would. I was a lot more into the snail facts, truthfully. But I have had other people say that this is something that really speaks to them because of that representation of that kind of disability. And so I think that it is a good representation of the disability, even though it's very much, maybe only like 20% of the book is about that. Most of the book is about snails. So I definitely enjoyed this, although it's not like my favorite book ever. I had a good time reading it. It really suited my mood. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that is everything that I read this week. If you have read any of the books that I've mentioned, if you have any thoughts, any comments, anything at all, go ahead, leave me a comment down below.